So here with more tonight, Karl Rove, former chief of staff to President George W. Bush, and Marie Harf, former President Obama's State Department spokesperson. Both are Fox News contributors. Great to have both of you here tonight as we wait for the president's speech to get started a few minutes down the road. Marie, I want to start with you. I heard General Jack Keane talk about this morning, and he said it took the Obama administration far too long to deal with ISIS, that he claims that the administration was too concerned with possible adverse consequences of their actions, and he sees President Trump's action as decisive and effective. What do you say?
Well, I think it took the whole world by surprise how quickly ISIS was able to take territory in Iraq and in Syria back when they first really rose to prominence. But after our administration sort of got a better sense of what was going on, we did put in place a plan that we see being carried out now. I mean, the plan to retake Raqqa was put in place during the Obama administration. Now, President Trump has done some things like loosen some of the rules of engagement. He has made some tweaks around the edges. But this is a plan that the military has had in place for a long time. And Ed is absolutely right. This is a big victory.
But some of the military would say that they weren't allowed to do what they believe that they could do. And, Karl, I want to get you in here. Even President Bush said he always listened to his generals. He had daily conversations with them. We did not see that in the Obama administration.
Oh, and let's be honest. The reason that ISIS spread so rapidly in that map that we saw recently across the Syria and Iraq was because in 2012, for political reasons, the Obama administration withdrew our military forces from Iraq. Does anybody think that if we had kept intelligence gathering and air assets and military trainers and military coordinators, that as an organized column of ISIS approached Mosul, that American firepower and American leadership could not have helped the Iraqis keep them restrained and not allow them to take Mosul and all that territory right up to literally the city boundaries of Baghdad. So, yes, President Trump did two things. First of all, he made clear that we're going to take action. And we saw that when, unlike when President Obama said that's a red line if they drop gas on their own people, when the Syrians dropped gas on their own people under this president, he immediately took action. And then he listened to the military and unleashed them on the mission that they could do, which is setting up a force of Syrians to work with American trainers and American assistants to do exactly what we saw today. But let's not kid ourselves. The battle against ISIS is going to continue.
Absolutely.
They've been kicked out of Raqqa, but just like al-Qaeda, we will face these people for years to come.
They have moved down into the Euphrates River Valley. That's where they have migrated while this area has been bombed and hit so ferociously. You also have the Russia element. They recently retook the city of Mayadeen, which is also a stronghold of ISIS. So now you've got really the battle between Russia and Iran and the Syrian forces backed by the United States for control of Syria.
Well, right. So the Syrian civil war is going to continue, regardless of the fact that we've retaken Raqqa. But I think the real threat from ISIS, and look, to respond to Karl here, ISIS would never have existed if its precursor hadn't been able to flourish after we invaded Iraq back in the Bush administration. So this has a longer history past the Obama administration. But to be clear here, what I think is the biggest threat is ISIS ideology having spread to Europe, to Africa, to Asia, and these lone wolves who maybe have never even gone to Syria.
What, Maria, I want to put something up on the screen because you have a great point. This came from the MI5 General Director Andrew Parker in the UK today. He says the UK has seen a dramatic upshift in threat from Islamic terrorism this year, reflecting attacks that have taken place in Westminster, Manchester, and London Bridge. He goes on to say, he said that threat is multidimensional, evolving rapidly, and operating at a scale and pace that we have not seen before. Those are terrifying words.
It is. And unlike al-Qaeda, which really wanted people who were going to carry out terrorist attack in their name to come meet them, to pledge allegiance, to train with them, ISIS doesn't care. They're fine if you go online and you get radicalized and then you commit a terrorist attack in their name. These people don't even have to go to Syria or Iraq. And it's much harder to find folks like that. So this is going to be a very serious challenge in the West, across Africa and Asia.
I want to play something from the Rose Garden today. This is the Greek Prime Minister with President Trump. He was asked a question by John Roberts. Watch this.
You said of the potential for a Donald Trump presidency, quote, "I hope we will not face this evil." And I'm wondering if after spending time with the president, you have changed your mind or if you're of the same mind.
I wish I knew that before my speech.
The meeting that we had was very productive. Not a moment did I feel that I threatened at any time.
A number of countries were a little bit nervous at the beginning, and I have very good relationships with the leaders of virtually every country I've dealt with.
Interesting moment.
One quick moment. May I say that I really was taken aback by your audacious swipe suggesting that President Bush was responsible for al-Qaeda and ISIS. Islamic terrorism has been around for 20 years before he took office. You may have forgotten that the attack was made in 1993 on the first
well,
attack on the
I was
World Trade
responding
Center.
to what you said about President Obama pulling out of Iraq and that being responsible for the rise of ISIS.
No, for the spread of ISIS.
Okay. Well, ISIS actually started as AQI during the Bush administration.
I get it. And we could go on with that for a long time.
We get to defend our own administration.
But in terms of the Greek prime minister saying that he was concerned that President Trump was going to be evil, he handled the moment well. And he said, you know what? A lot of people were nervous about me coming in.
Well, look, if you go to Europe, particularly in what we call the New Europe, Eastern and Central Europe, there's a growing recognition that America is there. And they want America to be more there. But America is there in a way that they were afraid it wouldn't be.
Carl and Marie, thank you very much. Great to see you guys.
A senior Syrian commander says U.S.-backed forces have liberated the city of Raqqa from ISIS terrorists. It would be a major defeat for an extremist group said to be collapsing. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin is following the situation from the Pentagon tonight. Good evening, Jennifer.
Good evening, Brett. The Pentagon isn't yet ready to pronounce the ISIS capital completely liberated. At a press briefing earlier today, a U.S. military spokesman told reporters 90% of Raqqa has been captured and roughly 100 ISIS fighters remain in the city. But that's not the biggest threat.
The fight in Raqqa is more about a fight against IEDs and explosives than it is against ISIS.
Highlighting the danger, Colonel Ryan Dillon said a U.S.-backed Syrian commander was killed by a roadside bomb while walking in Raqqa yesterday. 350 ISIS fighters have surrendered in the past week, but the pending fall of the ISIS capital doesn't mean the end of ISIS yet. Colonel Dillon said the fight will move to eastern Syria, where ISIS leaders have fled in recent months. Next door in Iraq, ISIS controls just 3% of the country, including a pocket along the Syrian border. Overall, about 6,500 ISIS fighters remain in Syria and Iraq. Today marks exactly 3 years since the U.S.-led coalition formed to fight ISIS. When ISIS fighters took Raqqa, there were iconic images of them parading in the streets and this armored vehicle doing donuts in the traffic circle. Today, U.S.-backed fighters recreated that scene by doing their own donuts to celebrate. Officials warn that ISIS will likely go underground to countries like Yemen, where the Pentagon says for the first time U.S. aircraft bombed 2 ISIS training camps yesterday. The Pentagon is concerned about what happens the day after Raqqa is liberated. There's no question when a terrorist group loses its capital, it's a big win. Hundreds of U.S. troops remain in Syria. Senior U.S. and Russian officers met face-to-face last week for the second time in a month as both countries seek to stay out of each other's way as the fighting moves to eastern Syria, Brett.
Jennifer Griffin live.
So here with more tonight, Karl Rove, former chief of staff to President George W. Bush, and Marie Harf, former President Obama's State Department spokesperson. Both are Fox News contributors. Great to have both of you here tonight as we wait for the president's speech to get started a few minutes down the road. Marie, I want to start with you. I heard General Jack Keane talk about this morning, and he said it took the Obama administration far too long to deal with ISIS, that he claims that the administration was too concerned with possible adverse consequences of their actions, and he sees President Trump's action as decisive and effective. What do you say?
Well, I think it took the whole world by surprise how quickly ISIS was able to take territory in Iraq and in Syria back when they first really rose to prominence. But after our administration sort of got a better sense of what was going on, we did put in place a plan that we see being carried out now. I mean, the plan to retake Raqqa was put in place during the Obama administration. Now, President Trump has done some things like loosen some of the rules of engagement. He has made some tweaks around the edges. But this is a plan that the military has had in place for a long time. And Ed is absolutely right. This is a big victory.
But some of the military would say that they weren't allowed to do what they believe that they could do. And, Carl, I want to get you in here. Even President Bush said he always listened to his generals. He had daily conversations with them. We did not see that in the Obama administration.
Oh, and let's be honest, the reason that...
To keep working on diplomacy.
He has made it clear to me to continue my diplomatic efforts
which we are, and we will, as I've told others, those diplomatic efforts will continue until the first bomb drops.
Lieutenant Colonel Michael Waltz is a former Green Beret commander and counterterrorism advisor to Vice President Cheney. Good to have you, Colonel Waltz. As you look at this situation, and we're hearing people like Ambassador John Bolton say, we are now at the point where the next move they make, we may have to respond to militarily.
Well, I think Ambassador Bolton is absolutely right in that time is not on our side. The North Koreans have been marching towards this capability for 30 years, and just over the last couple of years, they've developed an ICBM that can strike the west coast of the United States, conflicting reports on whether they can miniaturize a nuclear warhead, tested a hydrogen bomb. And I think what we're going to see going forward is the development of a 3-stage ICBM that can strike anywhere in the world, increasingly moving to mobile launchers, which makes it a lot harder for us to get at, and a move from liquid fuel to solid fuel, which means they can launch them a lot faster. So our diplomatic and economic sanction efforts need to have a real sense of urgency, and I'm okay with the president's tough rhetoric because I think that's what it's going to take to change the calculus in the region, with the Chinese in particular.
So I want to ask you about that, because I know that you have kind of a different take on how that tough rhetoric actually fits in with diplomacy, because the president's critics have said that they have concerns that the president is escalating rhetoric and making things worse. You say what?
Well, I say that actually the credible threat of military force is what makes our diplomacy effective. It's that belief with Kim Jong-un and the Chinese leader Xi that we will actually take this program out and take this regime out rather than accept some type of détente. It is that belief that is going to, I think, make them finally take action. The Chinese could choke off the North Korean regime economically tomorrow if it wanted to, but right now it sees this as a United States problem and a South Korean problem, not their problem. That's the dynamic that has to change.
And, when you talk about those sanctions, you've got the UN sanctions, the Treasury secondary sanctions, the Chinese banking sanctions all together. How much difference are they making right now?
Well, the Chinese are very good at kind of agreeing to things publicly, but then not actually enforcing. And so it's that enforcement piece where we have to hold their feet to the fire. And on the secondary side, that means we are actually sanctioning Chinese entities who do business with North Korea. I want to see us, on the diplomatic side, expand a coalition of others, Europeans, the Australians, Southeast Asia, that are also sanctioning those Chinese those Chinese entities. It's only when China feels the economic kind of pain from its business with North Korea do I think they'll actually take action.
All right, let's talk about the military. Colonel Waltz, what does it look like if we do have to stick a foot in? Because it won't be a toe. It'll be a foot if we have to respond to something. Who gets on board? You just named those nations that are getting on board with sanctions, but who gets on board militarily with us?
Well, listen, make no mistake, the military option is as awful as described. We will lose thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of civilians if war breaks out on the North Korean peninsula. And I think there are steps that we can take to change the security dynamic, again, from the Chinese standpoint, before we get to a preemptive strike. That is, we could reintroduce tactical nukes back into South Korea. We had those up until the 90s. The Japanese are looking at going offensive with their military, which right now is precluded by their constitution. So I think if China looks at the security landscape and sees things moving in a direction it doesn't like, again, it might finally take action.
So, I guess the worry is that China may take too long and that the clock is not really ticking the way it is for North Korea and China simultaneously. China can kind of sit back and feel the weight of the sanctions, but if North Korea just calls on a Wednesday and says, or doesn't, and does something without calling, that they're ready to go with their nukes, I mean, are the timetables going to link up? Can we wait for China to make a decision to get tough?
Well, that is, Harris, the critical question, and what I would expect President Trump is going to be raising with Chinese President Xi in his Asia trip that's upcoming. The key policy question for us is how long, and again, these are only intelligence estimates, but how far do we let North Korea progress towards actually being able to launch an offensive nuclear strike before we decide time's up. And, you know, I can't imagine, you know, one thing that's worth reminding folks is our ground-based missile defense. Those are the ones that hit these things in space, based in the United States and California and Alaska, is only about 50% effective. I'm not willing to roll the dice, and I don't suspect this president is either.
Look, I just want to bring up the point. We made a deal that far benefited Iran more than it did anybody else, including us, and we barely have eyes on what they're doing through the IAEA. We don't have the kind of eyes on North Korea and what they're doing. So are we even confident that we know where they are right now? That's a fair question. Yes or no, and then I got to let you go.
I don't know, and I don't suspect that folks here in Washington know.
No one should be agitating for war with North Korea or war on the Korean Peninsula. Our military is always prepared if necessary, but the cost of war with North Korea would be higher than anything we've seen in generations. We need to do everything we can right now to forestall the possibility of war.
So that is Rhode Island Senator and top Democrat on the Senate Armed Forces Committee, Jack Reed, pushing for a more unified rhetoric from the White House on the handling of North Korea. Reed just returned from Seoul, where he says officials are confused by the president's reactions and losing confidence. The rogue regime now saying nuclear war could break out at any moment. Robert Natter is a former U.S. Navy four-star admiral and former 7th Fleet commander. Sir, thank you for joining us. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I agree with the assessment that we're getting to the point of either diplomacy is going to succeed or it's going to fail. And that I think this administration has been fairly consistent in saying that they're not going to stand for a nuclear-armed North Korea. We'll see where it goes from there.
Yeah, that's the opposite of what the former administration, of course, said. National Security Advisor to President Obama, Susan Rice, said that basically we could tolerate a nuclear North Korea, that we have to pretty much accept the inevitable, were some of the things that she said. What's your reaction to that statement?
Well, my reaction to that statement is that the prior administration and indeed succeeding administrations going back 20 years really have tried to use the carrot and then the stick and then the carrot, all of which have failed miserably because we are facing a dominant threat here that's very serious. And guess who's holding the bag? The American people. This is not a good situation, and we have not been very good diplomatically at trying to restrict them.
A lot of experts say the reason why this situation is different from the others is because you have a weapon in the hand of someone who doesn't mind starving his people, who doesn't mind apparently killing his own family members, who is, you know, truly irrational. I guess we throw that word around a lot, but in this case, it seems that it certainly fits. Aren't there weapons that we can use to disable, say, their electric grid and other things that would be a step short of actually going to war, but would cause, some of these weapons to be damaged, destabilized? I mean, what are the other options?
Well, look, the line between intelligence gathering and intelligence work and an act of war is a very thin line. I would argue that taking down a nation's electric grid is an act of war. If someone or nation did it to us, I would certainly consider that an act of war. So we've got to be very careful here with what we're suggesting. The reality, though, is that we've got to exhaust diplomatic efforts, and then short of that, we've got to have ready a military response.
Very quick, the president is visiting Asia next month. He might go to the DMZ. Is that provocative?
Well, this is not the first time that we've had a head of state go to the DMZ. And we've had lots of members of Congress go there. So I would say it's not provocative in and of itself. Okay. Having said that, Kim Jong-un utilizes any action on our part and calls it provocative.
Okay. Sir, thank you. We appreciate your time.
You bet, Melissa.